Hello, welcome back to my channel. Now, what you're going to watch now is a video I recorded earlier this week, but unfortunately I screwed up the sound. Thanks to my friend Joe Francis. Thanks, Joe. We've been able to salvage the soundtrack a little bit. It's not the usual sound quality I would like, but I think it's pretty usable. Wherever there's dips in the sound, I've put in some subtitles. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, welcome back to my channel and my Trying to Like series. This is when I look at pieces of art or popular culture where I'm not sure how I feel. Do I like them or not? And I'm trying to get a conversation going. Now, today is probably going to be my most controversial episode ever. And those people who are easily offended or easily triggered should probably switch off right now, because I'm going to discuss the thorny issue of conspiracy theories. Now, what do we mean by conspiracy theories? Because many people who are interested in conspiracy theories don't like the term. They see it as a pejorative term, which it is. We'll discuss that in a moment. But basically what conspiracy theories has come to mean in the sort of public mindset is people who have ideas about the nature of politics or current affairs or events that are happening in the world right now that are not as reported in the mainstream media. Now, some of these are well-known things like, theories about the killing of JFK, about what really happened at 9/11, what really happened with COVID. Some of them are less well-known, but that's the basic idea. Many people, when they talk about conspiracy theories, they think of this sort of overarching conspiracy theory, that there's some kind of elite out there who've got power over the rest of us and are determining all our lives, and really they want to kill us and they might be aliens. That's a sort of famous sort of avatar of conspiracy theories. But some conspiracy theories are less sort of outlandish than that, and we'll have a look at a few of them. The other thing about conspiracy theories, though, is we are living in, this is a cliche, but it is true, the most important single commodity in the 21st century is information. We now have more information at our fingertips than any previous civilization or empire or people. And the problem is that that might seem like a wonderful thing, and it is in a way, but it's led to a bit of an issue. We've seen behind the curtain, haven't we? Now we can get information from all sorts of sources, not just from the BBC, not just from our education or our universities, but from anywhere around the world. And we find that people say different things and that people have a different idea of what the facts are. So what we've become clued to is when you get a plumber in or a builder, some plumbers are good, some plumbers are bad. Some plumbers will fix everything and clean everything up, and some will leave a mess, and they're cowboy builders or cowboy plumbers. And what we've started to realize is that's true of journalism. It's true of news agencies. There's good and bad news. There's good and bad information. Now, even our children are being taught about fake news. The way that the news is misreported or biased. And actually children are being taught in schools about how to notice this and what to look for, which is a good thing, I think. So this whole is the world of conspiracy theories. Now, I've always been interested in this kind of thing for two reasons. First of all, because I love anything that's hidden, that's not, kosher in the view of society. I love the idea of hidden occult knowledge. That's always appealed to me. So conspiracy theories where someone's saying something that other people don't think should be said, or a secret story that no one else knows, kind of appeals to me. But secondly, I've had an obsession since I first went to university with a particular problem. How do we pass down information? How does a society ensure that the right information, good information, passes down to the next generation? This obsesses me. It keeps me awake at night. Let me explain what I mean. When I went to university, like many students, you realize that some of your lecturers know what they're talking about, and some of them don't really know what they're talking about. But all of them, because they're in academia, are considered authorities, right? If you get a journalist on a newspaper who's called the economics expert, they're an authority. If you get a professor of film, they're an authority. But you talk to anyone who's in academia and they will tell you that there are some academics and intellectuals they respect and some they don't. But how am I, if you've got a mathematician who says, this bloke's a brilliant mathematician, this guy's not so good, how am I going to know? If only a small select cabal of intellectuals or academics can tell who are the good academics and who really knows what they're talking about, where does that leave the rest of us? How do we make sure that the best information comes to us? You see, I've talked about this before on this channel. I know for a fact that many people writing about film in newspapers and many academics teaching film in universities, and this is going to sound a bit conceited, but I'm going to go there, they don't know as much as me. They don't know as much as many of my subscribers who contribute to the comments here. They have very little curiosity and very little sensitivity to the medium. I know this. I know that really if I want to find out about film, I go to independent film critics. I don't go to journalists who write reviews for the newspapers. I don't go to academics, not many anyway. But that gives me a sense of vertigo, because if I'm picking up a newspaper to read who's, the economics editor tell me how to, put what banks or savings accounts put my money in, how do I know that he knows what he's talking about? If the film critic doesn't, what chance he knows what he's talking about? This bothers me. And this is another reason why I got interested in conspiracy theories. Is there information out there that is better information than the information I'm receiving? I particularly got interested in conspiracy theories during COVID. I had some time on my hands. I live alone. I was in lockdown. You've got to have something to do. So I started going around on YouTube and I started exploring. I went into the rabbit warrens of these conspiracy theories. And I started with David Icke. If you're a British viewer, you'll know who David Icke is. If you're not, you may not have heard of him. I am fascinated by David Icke. He absolutely obsesses me. Here's this guy, right? I remember this when I was a teenager. He was a bland sports reporter on TV, sort of housewife's favorite type, And then in the late 1980s, 1990, he suddenly changed and he started setting himself up as almost the second coming. And he'd had some kind of messages from, space or God, and he had to tell his story. And he started telling the story that we were actually overrun by aliens who were manipulating us, rather like in John Carpenter's fantastic film, They Live, where the aliens manipulate people through subliminal messages in the TV and in advertising. And he completely changed his reputation overnight. And there was this famous interview with Terry Wogan on television where the audience started laughing at him. And ever since then, I've been quietly fascinated by him. He's a figure of fun in Britain, though he does actually fill out stadiums. People follow him all around the world. And he kind of had a renaissance during COVID. So I started with him and I started going down the rabbit warren. Now, it's significant in a way that I started looking at this during COVID. Why? Because COVID is a watershed in the relationship of the public to information. Prior to COVID, it was very unusual for someone to lose their job or be ostracized from society because they had a very different or extreme opinion. Arguably, if you were a Holocaust denier, or if you were someone who said there was, significant differences between the races in terms of cognitive ability or intelligence, that could get you removed from your academic department or your job or have your name taken off things. But that was about it, right? It was very unusual for institutions in the state to step forward and say, you can't say that. But in COVID, it happened. For the first time in front of the entire public, it happened. The government said, we must give the correct information to the public, and we cannot have any other information given. So people were prevented from disagreeing. Any medical researchers or doctors or pundits who said anything different from the standard line on medicine during COVID were ostracized. And we had this new bogeyman in our society, didn't we? Anti-vaxxers, They're coming for you, Agatha. The anti-vaxxers are coming. And you had this ridiculous situation where ex-footballers like Matt Letizia suddenly were evil people who we mustn't listen to. Which was kind of amusing, I thought. It was the first time that the state had said, no, we have to police information. That's significant, right? And the thing is that it's understandable. What they were doing, in a way, you could say was a positive thing. Because we know now in the 21st century, as I said at the beginning, information is the big commodity. And we know that it is the most powerful weapon in the 21st century. We know because governments had admitted it, that foreign states or, movements that are inimical to us and our way of life are flooding our countries and our systems deliberately with false information, false narratives, propaganda, trying to turn people to their way of thinking. That's now a huge sort of, military organization. We know that. They've admitted it. Intelligence agencies have admitted it. We know that it's true. Advertisers have done it in the past. Now governments are using it. Everyone's using it. So any government worth its salt has to think about this. It has to legislate for it. Now, if you've got a pandemic, you've got a disease, it could kill a lot of people, and, it's going to flood your NHS, your health system, it does seem reasonable, doesn't it? That the governing authority says, well, we've got to get the right information to these people so they can protect themselves properly and we can run the health service properly. That is a reasonable thing to think. Imagine if they hadn't done that, loads of people had got hold of the wrong information and had died because of it. They'd get blamed for that. Right. But on the other hand, it sets a very dangerous precedent, because it sets the precedent of undesirable ideas and opinions, where someone can actually literally and officially be cancelled because of what they're saying. We might agree with what the government did during COVID, but nevertheless, it did normalise, to use that awful word, the idea that this information, this idea might be bad and might see that person sidelined or silenced. That watershed moment in our history lies behind everything I'm going to say in this video. But I started looking into conspiracy theories. I was fascinated by them, and I followed them down the rabbit warren. And at first it was a bit of fun. But then I got pulled up short. The first thing was, I started to find out things, facts. So this conspiracy theorist would be saying, this happened. And I was like, really? I didn't know that. I've never seen that on the news or in the papers. So I sort of looked around and I found out, actually, it's true. That did happen. Why didn't I know that? Why wasn't I told about that? I'd like to give just a little example. We're living in the terrible days of the Israel-Hamas war. That, on October the 7th, Hamas went across the borders and killed 1,400 people, tortured others, held others hostage. Did you know, right, that between the 5th and the 10th of October, Turkey did a series of drone strikes on Syria, also killing people? And it was also a kind of revenge act after a bomb attack in Ankara on the 1st of October. Did you know that? Do you remember that being on the mainstream news or in the mainstream papers? Why not? Isn't that as important? Ask yourself a question. You've probably watched the news as much as I have. You've probably seen endless discussions of the battlefield in Ukraine. You know point by point what's happening in Palestine right now. But do you know point by point what Saudi Arabia did in Yemen? I doubt whether you do. But why not? Isn't that also significant? This sort of thing bothers me. Why should I, a normal person just trying to, hold down my job and live my life, I should be expected to get decent information from my media, but they're not telling me things. They're telling me about this ad nauseum, but they're not telling me about that. Why? This is the soil in which conspiracy theories grow. People think, well, you're telling me this, but you're not telling me that. Why are you prioritizing that over this? what's going on. You realise that there's an agenda. There are vested interests here. You can't blame people for starting to question the media when that happens. The problem that people are becoming aware of is that the media operates rather like the Conservative government in the 1980s. Famously in Britain, a Conservative minister said during Thatcher's government, "We don't lie, but we are economical with the truth." In other words, we're going to tell the public some things, but hold back things we don't think they need to know. That's what the mainstream media does. It's economical with the truth. Many people say the media lies. I don't necessarily believe that, because you can get caught out in a lie. But what you can do, you can be economical with the truth. You can massage the truth. You can make this look more important, that look less important. I never forget when hundreds, thousands of people came out on the streets to protest against Brexit. That night, the Sky News report put the demonstrations in Hong Kong before the demonstrations in their own country. You see, then you make the demonstration in Hong Kong seem more important, more worthy of your attention. So you prioritize some ideas and you deprioritize other ideas. It's interesting, isn't it? I was talking earlier about the way that attacks on Islamic countries, mostly Islamic countries like Syria and Yemen, are not reported in the British newspapers. Well, on the flip side of that, when in Britain we had a problem with grooming gangs in Rochdale, Rotherham and Oxford, the way that the media tiptoed around the fact that over 80% of the men involved were of Pakistani Muslim heritage, and nearly over 90% of the girls involved were white, they didn't really mention the ethnicity of the perpetrators and the victims in many, many reports. You'd have thought that would be front page news, wouldn't you? You'd think they'd be spending about 15 minutes on it every night. They hardly ever put it as the main headline, ever. Whereas when Hamas invaded Israel, immediately all the other news got knocked off the news, as if it was unimportant suddenly, including Ukraine. That's the fertile soil in which conspiracy theories take root, because people think, well, hang on, this is not equal. You know what I was saying about the grooming gangs? In the British press, they were timid about talking about the ethnicity. But in India, in the mainstream press in India, it's been out and proud, and they've been talking about it in panels. Why? This gives us a clue how mainstream medias operate. Because the current leader of India is Modi, who is a Hindu nationalist. And Muslims in India have been having a tough time, actually. So it's politically expedient for the mainstream media in India to be discussing this issue, but it is not politically expedient. In fact, it's very, touchy subject for the British media. That shows you how the mainstream media is operating. It's not this unconscious, arbiter of, unmediated truth and impartial truth. No, it's operating according to political and cultural interests in the country in which it's operating. So therefore, conspiracy theorists can say, well, then we're not getting the whole truth, are we? Another thing I began to become aware of as I was looking into conspiracy theories, I became aware of how the media, the mainstream media, constantly belittles and demonizes the internet and social media. You must have noticed this yourself. Social media is the source of all ills, isn't it? It's dreadful. And you can't trust the news you read on social media or on the internet. Why does the media do that? Obvious, because the internet is a rival. It's both a business rival, because, more people are watching the internet, so that less people are watching their shows, but also it's a rival in terms of authority, right? They want to be seen as the authoritative tellers of truth. If you've got some guy over here saying something different, you need to knock that out, because otherwise it undermines your authority. And the thing is, this bothers me because I've come to like social media. I'm aware, I think Umberto Eco was right when he said the problem with social media is in the past. You had to work hard and to be good to have your opinions published. Now any old twat can say things. he says on his own YouTube channel. But it's true, isn't it? Any old bloke down the pub can now crap on and on about nothing for hours, like I am. And, you know, it's published, right? And I agree with Umberto Eco on that point. But on the other hand, if we accept that we have a mainstream media that is operating according to its own interests, social media has a hugely important function. It means that other ideas and other viewpoints and facts that are suppressed by that media can get an outlet. And people who think alike can contact each other across the world. That is a wonderful thing. And we shouldn't denigrate that. And there's another point here. Going back to what I was saying earlier about the idea of good and bad news, let's see what conspiracy theorists really are. Conspiracy theorists hate the term conspiracy theorists. And they're right, actually. Because what the media does is it uses language to denigrate and sideline anything that doesn't agree with its perspective. I've spoken before on this channel how the perspective of the current media and state is narrowing to a sort of centre-left, liberal, middle-class perspective. So if you don't agree with that perspective, you're other. And the media has ways of making us feel that you're other. If you have an opinion that's not in that centre-left barrier, you're called far-right or far-left. You know, far away from us, right? So any idea that doesn't agree with that, you call it far-right, far-left, and that knocks it out, doesn't it? Or you can call it reactionary. I remember when I was at university studying both literature and film, if you had a film or a book that was seen as right-wing or conservative, it was called reactionary. If it was left-wing, it was called subversive. So you could make the most crude left-wing polemics, and they would be subversive. But if you had a crude right-wing polemic, they were reactionaries. The way that language is used to subtly change how we think, right? Conspiracy theorist is such a term. So what is a conspiracy theorist? Let's get beyond that name. Well, they're a journalist. That's what they are. They are people who are trying to find out the truth their own way. But they're not doing it as a paid journalist. They're not professional. They are amateurs. Now, amateur has a sort of slightly negative connotation, so let's say non-professional. They're not working for a big news agency. They're not working for a newspaper. They're not working for a broadcaster. They're working independently. And what they're doing is they're trying to find out the truth outside the world of professional journalism. They are amateur journalists. So when they're knocked down as conspiracy theorists by the mainstream media, that's what the media is doing. They're getting rid of a rival, a business rival and a rival of their authority. And that's why, in some respects, we should be sympathetic to these amateur journalists. They're doing a public service. But therein lies the problem, doesn't it? There lies the rub. You see, we've already spoken in this video about the fact that we've now realized that some of the mainstream media is good and some of it is bad. Well, that's going to be true of amateur journalists as well. Some of them are going to be good. Some of them are going to be terrible. How do we know which is which? That's the great conundrum of the 21st century, isn't it? How do we know what information and what journalism is good, what information and what journalism is bad? You see, let's be honest with each other here. So much of what we think we know, we take on trust. Right from our education, right from our ABCs, through to our university, through to what we read in the paper, what we understand, we take it on trust. We don't really know. We know that the earth is round, don't we? But I don't know how to prove it, really. You know, so if we sat down and said, how do I know most of this? Most of the stuff you think you know, you could not prove it. We take it on trust. How do we know what is right and what's wrong? One of the things, a beef I have with some conspiracy theorist friends of mine, not all of them, some of them, some conspiracy theorists are rather arrogant. They say, oh God, Mike, don't you know about building 13 or building 19 or whatever building it is near 9/11? Don't you know about that? Oh God. And haven't you read all the reports about COVID? I mean, honestly, as if because they've read this other opposing view, therefore they are automatically more knowledgeable than you are. But how do you know that that's true? If you're questioning the authority of mainstream media, why can't I question the authority of what you're reading? And people will say, well, look, Mike, this person's saying it, this person's saying it, this person's saying it, this person's saying it. Well, I could go into a bookshop tomorrow. Let me put it this way. I'm 51 years of age. For the rest of my born days, I could read books, only books, that will tell me that aliens came to the earth and helped the Egyptians build the pyramids. You would not believe how many books there are in bookshops. I go to Amazon, Waterstones, there are bloody billions of books have been written about the fact that ancient monuments, you know, in the Inca world and in the Egyptian world were built by aliens. They weren't. Yet there's bloody stacks of books that cross-reference each other telling you this. You know, when I go to my mum's house, I love channel surfing. And there's a channel called the History Channel. It's not called the dumbass fantasy channel. It's called the History Channel. And it's got endless programs. I love watching them. They're called Ancient Aliens. And they're hilarious the way they tiptoe around the ethics of documentary. So instead of saying, you know, aliens came to, you know, the Aztecs and helped them build pyramids, what it says is, did aliens thousands of years ago come to Earth in a spaceship shaped like an egg and teach people how to build pyramids? Did they have 3 heads? And did they actually invent the whole of the British Empire? No. But the whole program is just made up of questions. That way they don't have to actually... they don't break any documentary rules because they don't actually explicitly say anything. The whole 50 minutes is made up of questions. It's hilarious. But you see the problem. If I wanted to believe that aliens built the pyramids, I've got bloody a plethora of books that will tell me that's true. The same is true of conspiracy theories, isn't it? There's going to be billions of books out there saying that 9/11 was a creation of the FBI or the CIA or whatever. That doesn't mean it's true, does it? It doesn't mean that you sitting there watching this can actually prove it's true. That's the problem, isn't it? The other problem with conspiracy theories, yes, they do rely on facts that are provable. But look, you can take fact A, fact B, and fact C. You can draw your own line between them. Any historian will tell you that that's the way history works. That's why historians are always disagreeing with each other. Because the line you draw is the soul of the matter. It's the heart of the matter, isn't it? You know, I could say, that's a load of crap that you're saying. You could come back to me and say, yes, but look, A, B, and C are all true. Yes, but that doesn't mean that your thesis about them is all true. It goes back to those old logic things, doesn't it? Nellie is an elephant, they're pink, therefore all elephants are pink. The nature of history is to try and draw the right line between A, B, and C. And also, if you've got facts A, B, and C, but what about facts D, E, and F? You see, it's the old classic thing that you're told as a student at university, isn't it? That you must suit your ideas to the facts and not the facts to your ideas. A bad student decides this is true and then massages everything that they come across to make that true. Instead of looking at the evidence in front of their eyes and then building towards a conclusion, if you decide that the Americans were behind 9/11, you'll go looking for those texts and those internet sites that will tell you that's true. And then, of course, it backs you up and you believe it. But then what about all those other sites that are saying that's not true with all their evidence? That's the problem. So where does that leave us? If none of us can really prove our authorities are right, do we just give up? Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? One of the great cancers, I think the great cancer of the 20th century, was the idea predominantly introduced by the left that truth is relative. I don't think it is. I think truth is absolute. No one individual can ever know the truth completely. So it's relative in that sense. We only have our own idea of the truth. But the truth is out there, I think. And I also still believe in the Enlightenment idea that in a courtroom, through evidence, in a scientific laboratory, through evidence, we can build up enough information and evidence and fact to ascertain the truth. And I think that the current way that society is dropping or attacking that idea is extremely dangerous. So to end this little talk on conspiracy theories, I'm going to stick my neck out on a conspiracy theory that gets people very vexed these days. And that is climate change. Now, climate change, most people believe in climate change, but there's a strong subset of society who don't and who think it's an attack. They think it's an attack on the poor and on developing countries. You know, these developed countries, they've industrialized themselves, they've done very well out of it. Now they want to try and, you know, stop industrialization because it's bad for the environment. And any change of the system to a greener economy is going to hit the bottom level of society hardest, as it always does. Now, I choose to believe in climate change. Dun, dun, dun. Because A, the evidence of it I see around me, and I think we should always base our ideas mostly on evidence and our own experience. But B, because the vast majority of scientists say there's something in it, or it's true. Now, the conspiracy theorist says, oh, Mike, you are such an idiot. God, what a twat. Don't you realize that some of those scientists are in the pay of, you know, the state or organizations that want them to talk about climate change? That might be true. But then, by that token, there's going to be other scientists who are in the pay of oil or gas companies or fossil fuel companies who want them to say that climate change is a mirage, is a chimera. So there's going to be a certain percentage of scientists on the climate change side who are in the pay of whoever, and there's going to be a certain percentage of scientists on the anti-climate change side who are in the pay of someone, right? That still leaves the vast majority of the scientists who believe in climate change. And I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'd rather believe in it and start getting the world greener and healthier than say, oh, I'm not going to believe in it, and it gets worse and worse and worse. I choose to believe in something, science, which has shown me through proof and through evidence that the vast majority of time it works, and it can prove how it's working. I'm using this system and this science, this science works. Why should I not believe the same people behind this when they come to talk about climate change? It's a gamble, I suppose. I'm putting my chip on the casino table, but I'm doing it based on evidence and on precedent. Whereas it seems to me the conspiracy theorist is taking the opposite tack. Have fun on the comments below about that one. So that's kind of where I stand on conspiracy theories. I'd just like to mention two little things before I go. One, when I got into conspiracy theories, when I followed them down the rabbit warren, one thing I couldn't help notice was this. They always ended up at Israel and Zionism. It is extraordinary how many conspiracy theorists out there, doesn't matter what the subject is, it could be, you know, the fact that Cadbury's chocolate bars are shorter now. It comes down to the Jews. It's the Jews are behind it. The Zionists are behind it. The anti-Semitism in the world of conspiracy theories is something to behold. The second point I'd like to make is this idea of this governing elite. This has always bothered me. When did they start? Was it in the 1930s? Was it in the 1910s? When did they start? And when did they start this master plan to take over the world? And if there is an elite, why are they so crap? Why do they keep getting things wrong? Why are there so many wars? Why is there so many destruction of the markets? It doesn't work. You know, it's a ludicrous idea. Did this plan start in 1934? Yeah, they got together in 1934. And then how did they get together? Who got together? How did they arrange everything? How can everything that's happening to us be the operation of an elite? That doesn't make any sense. I can't help feeling that this idea of elite comes from something that's as old as time, and that is resentment. The resentment of those like us who are have-nots towards those who have money and those who have power. Now, people with power and money have always tried to hold on to that power and money. Of course they have. Of course they're going to try and guy things to make it suitable to them. Of course they are. There's nothing mystical or strange in that. That's just human life. And there's always going to be this resentment from those of us who don't have that much. I'm living in this one-bedroom flat and thinking, how does that guy have all these private planes and jets and everything? How are they doing that? But really, that's the impulse behind this, isn't it? It's just that sort of strange resentment manifesting itself literally as a theory, as a narrative. Well, I hope this hasn't triggered you too much. Before I go, I'd like to make 2 book recommendations to you. Let me read you a little bit about this. In our age, the idea of intellectual liberty is under attack from 2 directions. On the one side are its theoretical enemies, the apologists of totalitarianism, and on the other its immediate practical enemies, monopoly and bureaucracy. Who wrote that? Jordan Peterson? Douglas Murray, one of these blowhards of the right? George Orwell, in the 1940s, in his essay, The Prevention of Literature. These problems are not new. They're as old as the sky. And I'd also like to recommend this book, In Defense of History. I've been talking largely in this discussion about the present, but actually conspiracy theories and the manipulation of truth is much more important in the discussion of history. There's not just fake news, there is fake history. A few weeks ago, a book was published in this country saying that black people built Stonehenge. This caused a flurry of anger among the usual right-wing suspects, but no one else really got worried about it, possibly because they were worried about being called racist if they criticised it. But our history is being changed. This is what Orwell was concerned about in this book and, of course, in 1984. You control the past, you control the future. This is an excellent book, Richard J. Evans' In Defense of History, where he talks about how in academia since the 60s, from leftist historians has come this idea which he calls postmodern history, which is, again, this idea I'm talking about of authorities. If you can't trust authorities, if you don't trust, say, the authorities of the West or of the white man, then that evidence gets knocked out. And then you can rebuild history however you choose, according to your politics and your ideology. But that's dangerous, isn't it? Because then, how do we prove anything? You could say anything at all that you wanted to, and it could be true. How do we not know? He tries to argue passionately in favour of primary and secondary evidence, in favour of history, again, as a discipline, almost as a scientific study. It's an outstanding book. And what is depressing is he first wrote it in the 90s, and it's becoming more and more relevant every day. Okay, that was quite a controversial video, very long video. I know that some people will be upset by things I've said. I do invite comments, please not abusive ones. Please be kind. But I'd love to hear any dissenting views or ideas. I don't know what's going to come up on the comments, but I'm looking forward to it. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.